November 5th, 1605. Midnight. Westminster, London. A man is standing in a cellar beneath the House of Lords. The air is thick with dust and dampness. Cold, dark, silent. He's surrounded by 36 barrels, each one filled with gunpowder, over 2,000 pounds of explosives, enough to obliterate an entire city block. Tomorrow morning, King James I will walk through the doors directly above this man's head. Every member of Parliament will be there. The Lords, the Commons, bishops, judges, the entire government of England, all gathered in one room, directly above 36 barrels of gunpowder. And this man, standing in the darkness, has a length of slow-burning fuse in his pocket. In less than 12 hours, he plans to light it, to destroy the building, to kill the king, to decapitate the government, to change the course of history in a single devastating explosion. His name is Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes to the English. He's 35 years old, a soldier, an explosives expert, a true believer. And he's absolutely willing to die in the blast if necessary. But here's what they don't teach you in school. Guy Fawkes wasn't the mastermind. He wasn't the leader. He wasn't even the one who came up with the plan. He was the demolitions expert, the trigger man, the last man standing, the one willing to stay behind and light the fuse while everyone else escaped. The real conspiracy was far bigger, far more sophisticated, far more desperate, and far more brutal than the fireworks and bonfires and children's rhymes suggest. This is the true story of the Gunpowder Plot, not just Guy Fawkes, but the 13 men who nearly changed history, the year of careful planning, the betrayals, the torture, the executions, and the question that still haunts historians over 400 years later. Did they ever really have a chance? Or were they doomed from the start? Welcome to the Bonfire Night Special. This is the story behind the celebration, and I promise you, by the end of this, you'll never look at November 5th the same way again. Let me take you back, way back, because you can't understand Guy Fawkes without understanding the world he lived in, the hatred, the fear, the violence, the desperation that drove 13 men to plot mass murder. England, 1605. King James I has been on the throne for 2 years. He came from Scotland when Queen Elizabeth died without an heir. And from the moment he arrived, English Catholics hoped things would get better. Because Elizabeth's reign had been hard, very hard. Catholics weren't allowed to worship openly. Priests who celebrated Mass were hunted, captured, executed, hanged, drawn, and quartered as traitors. Catholic families paid massive fines for not attending Protestant services. Fines that bankrupted them. Their children were taken away, raised Protestant. Their property was confiscated. But James's mother had been Catholic, Mary, Queen of Scots, executed by Elizabeth. Catholics thought maybe, just maybe, James would show mercy, grant tolerance, allow them to worship in peace. They were wrong. James was more anti-Catholic than Elizabeth ever was, because he blamed Catholics for his mother's death. Catholic conspiracies, Catholic plots, Catholic assassins. They had destroyed his family, driven his mother to the executioner's block, and he would never forgive them. When James took the throne, he promised moderation, said he wouldn't persecute anyone for their religion. Catholics celebrated, dared to hope. And then James betrayed them, not gradually, immediately, harshly. The persecution intensified, the fines increased, the arrests multiplied. Priests were hunted more aggressively than ever. By 1605, English Catholics were desperate, angry, hopeless. and a small group of them decided that if they couldn't live in peace, they would die fighting. They would strike such a blow against the Protestant government that England would never recover. They would kill the king, destroy Parliament, and restore Catholic rule by force. That's the world that created the Gunpowder Plot, not a world of fireworks and bonfires, a world of religious war, of persecution, of families torn apart, of people living in fear, of desperation so profound that mass murder seemed like the only answer. Now let me tell you about the men who tried to do it. Guy Fawkes, born April 13th, 1570, York, England. And everything about his early life was completely ordinary. Respectable Protestant family. His father was a proctor and an advocate. Decent income, good education. Young Guy attended St. Peter's School in York, one of the best schools in the North. Nothing about his childhood suggested he would become the most famous terrorist in British history. Nothing suggested he'd die being tortured and executed for trying to blow up Parliament. But two things happened that changed everything. First, his father died when Guy was 8 years old. Sudden, unexpected. Left the family in difficult circumstances. His mother remarried, and her second husband, Dennis Bainbridge, was Catholic, recusant Catholic, the kind who refused to attend Protestant services no matter the consequences. Young Guy converted, embraced Catholicism, and not quietly, not half-heartedly, with the fervor of someone who had found absolute truth. The kind of convert who's more devoted than those born into the faith, the kind who sees the world in black and white, us versus them, saved versus damned. The second thing that changed Guy's life was the persecution. He watched his stepfather fined repeatedly for recusancy, watched Catholic neighbors arrested, watched priests hunted like animals, watched families destroyed, and he decided he couldn't just watch anymore. At 21 years old in 1591, Guy Fawkes left England, sold his inheritance, his father's property, everything he had, and he went to fight for Catholic Spain against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands. The 80 Years' War, Catholics versus Protestants, good versus evil. At least that's how Guy saw it. And he was good, very good. He rose through the ranks, gained a reputation, known for his courage, his discipline, his skill, but more than anything, he was known for his expertise with explosives, undermining fortifications, blowing up walls, destroying gates. He learned exactly how much gunpowder was needed to bring down stone structures, how to place charges for maximum effect, how to time fuses, how to create catastrophic explosions. For 15 years, Guy Fawkes fought, learned, became an expert in destruction, and dreamed of returning to England, not as a refugee, not as a defeated Catholic, but as an avenging angel. Someone who would strike such a blow against the Protestant government that Catholics would finally be free. In 1603, Queen Elizabeth died. James took the throne, and for a brief moment, Guy considered going home. Maybe things would be different. Maybe James would grant tolerance. Maybe the war was over. Then news reached him. James had betrayed them. The persecution was worse than ever, and Guy Fawkes knew. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning, and he had a very specific set of skills that might be useful. In 1604, a man came to see him, wealthy, connected, charismatic, a man with a plan. His name was Robert Catesby, and he would change Guy Fawkes' life forever. Robert Catesby. If Guy Fawkes is the face of the Gunpowder Plot, Catesby was its soul, the mastermind, the leader, the man who conceived the plan and recruited the conspirators, the man whose charisma and conviction held the group together through a year of planning and stress and fear. Born 1572, wealthy Catholic family, educated, handsome, everything Guy Fawkes wasn't. Where Guy was a soldier, rough and practical, Catesby was a gentleman, refined, eloquent, the kind of man who could convince you of anything, who could make you believe that the impossible was not only possible, but necessary. But Catesby had been radicalized, slowly, painfully, by events that destroyed his faith in peaceful solutions. In 1601, he had been involved in the Essex Rebellion. A failed attempt to overthrow Queen Elizabeth, he was arrested, imprisoned, released only after paying a massive fine that nearly bankrupted him. His family's property was confiscated, his social standing destroyed, and then his wife died, 1598, leaving him alone with his young son, grief-stricken, bitter, convinced that England under Protestant rule was hell on earth, that Catholics would never be free until the government was destroyed, until the king was dead, until everything was burned down and rebuilt. By 1604, Catesby had a plan, and it was audacious, brilliant, horrifying. He would blow up Parliament, not just the building, the entire government, the king, the lords, the commons, all of them in one stroke, one explosion, and in the chaos that followed, Catholics would rise up, install a Catholic monarch, restore the true faith by force, by fire, by blood. But Catesby couldn't do it alone. He needed men, loyal men, skilled men, men willing to die for the cause, and he was very good at recruiting. The first man he approached was Thomas Wintour, younger, idealistic, educated. Wintour was initially skeptical, doubted the plan could work. But Catesby was persuasive, convinced him that this was God's will, that they had no choice, that passive resistance had failed and violence was the only answer left. Wintour agreed and suggested they needed an explosives expert, someone who understood gunpowder, someone who had experience bringing down buildings, and he knew exactly who they needed. His old friend, a soldier fighting in the Netherlands, a man named Guy Fawkes. Wintour traveled to Europe, found Guy in the Spanish Netherlands, explained the plan, told him they were going to blow up Parliament, kill King James, restore Catholic England. All they needed was someone who knew how to make it happen. Guy Fawkes said yes immediately, didn't hesitate, didn't question. This was what he'd been waiting for, what he'd been training for. 15 years of fighting, 15 years of learning how to destroy things. And now he would put that knowledge to use for God, for the faith, for justice. In April 1604, Guy Fawkes returned to England using a false name, Guido, his Spanish name. He met with Catesby and Wintour, and they swore an oath on a Catholic missal, a prayer book. They swore to blow up Parliament or die trying, and then they received communion, in secret, from a Jesuit priest named Father John Gerard, who blessed their mission without knowing what it was. The conspiracy was born, and over the next months, Catesby recruited more men. Thomas Percy, a wealthy landowner with connections, John Wright and Christopher Wright, brothers, soldiers, Robert Keyes, Thomas Bates, Ambrose Rookwood, Everard Digby, Francis Tresham, each recruited carefully, each sworn to secrecy, each believing absolutely that they were doing God's work. 13 men total, the inner circle, all willing to die, all convinced that mass murder was not only justified but holy. And Robert Catesby was their prophet, their leader, the man who kept them focused, kept them believing, kept them moving forward even when doubt crept in. Now, they just needed to figure out how to get enough gunpowder into Parliament to blow it sky high. And that's where things got complicated. May 1604, the conspirators have their oath, their mission, their expert, but they have a problem, a significant problem. You can't just walk into Parliament with 2,000 pounds of gunpowder. Security is tight. The building is guarded. They need a way in that doesn't involve the front door. Thomas Percy has an idea. He's connected, wealthy, respectable. He rents a house right next to the House of Lords, Westminster, prime location. And once they're inside, they can start digging a tunnel underground, beneath the building, into the cellars beneath Parliament. It's ambitious, dangerous, backbreaking work, but it's their only option. So they begin. Guy Fawkes, Robert Catesby, Thomas Winter, John Wright, Christopher Wright, taking shifts, digging, slowly, carefully, through solid stone foundations, dirt, rock, using pickaxes, shovels, their bare hands. They work at night, when the streets are empty, when nobody is watching. They dispose of the dirt in the Thames, bucket by bucket, careful not to leave evidence, not to draw attention. They're gentlemen, wealthy landowners. Nobody suspects them of manual labor, of digging like miners. It's the perfect cover. But the work is brutal. Stone foundations don't yield easily. Progress is measured in inches. Days pass, weeks, months, and they've barely made a dent. The tunnel is nowhere near long enough. They're exhausted, bleeding, covered in cuts and bruises, and starting to wonder if this plan is even possible. Then Christmas 1604 arrives. Parliament is in recess. The building is empty, and they keep digging. Through the holiday, through the cold, through the doubt, because they're committed now, too committed to turn back. They've sworn an oath on a holy book before God. They can't stop, won't stop. By February 1605, they've made significant progress. The tunnel is maybe 20 feet long now, but they're still nowhere near their target. And then they hit something, a wall, thick, stone, much thicker than anything they've encountered before. It's a supporting wall for the House of Lords, load-bearing. They can't just break through it, not without causing the building to collapse, not without alerting everyone to what they're doing. They're stuck, frustrated, exhausted, months of work, and they're still no closer to getting explosives beneath Parliament. Some of them want to quit, to abandon the plan, to accept that it's impossible. But then something miraculous happens, or cursed, depending on how you look at it. March 1605, just when the conspirators are about to give up on the tunnel, they get news. A cellar, directly beneath the House of Lords. The tenant is leaving. It's available for rent. They can't believe their luck. Months of back-breaking digging, and now they don't even need the tunnel. They can just rent the space, walk right in. No need to dig, no need to hide. They'll have legitimate access. Right beneath Parliament. It's perfect, almost too perfect. Thomas Percy handles the rental, uses his connections, his respectability, signs the lease under his own name. Nobody questions it. Why would they? He's a gentleman, a landowner. Of course he needs storage space in Westminster. Perfectly normal. The conspirators abandoned the tunnel, moved their operation to the cellar, and now they face a new challenge. Gunpowder. They need a lot of it, over a ton. maybe two, and they need to move it into the cellar without anyone noticing. Robert Catesby handles the procurement. Gunpowder isn't hard to get if you have money, and Catesby has money, or at least he did. He's been bankrupting himself funding this conspiracy, selling property, borrowing, going into debt. But he doesn't care. This is God's work. Money is temporary. The cause is eternal. They buy the gunpowder in small batches from different suppliers, different cities. No single purchase large enough to draw attention. And they smuggle it into the cellar, barrel by barrel, at night, through back streets, risking discovery with every trip. By July 1605, they have 36 barrels, 2,000 pounds of gunpowder, stacked in the cellar, covered with firewood and coal to disguise them. Anyone who looks will see fuel for winter, nothing suspicious, nothing dangerous. And Guy Fawkes moves in, takes up residence, guards the gunpowder day and night. He rents a room nearby, uses the name John Johnson. A servant? Nobody important, nobody worth noticing. And he spends his days in that cellar, waiting, watching, making sure nobody discovers their secret. Months pass. Summer turns to autumn, and the conspirators wait for Parliament to reconvene for the state opening, when King James and the entire government will be gathered in one room, directly above 36 barrels of gunpowder. The date is set, November 5th, 1605, the state opening of Parliament. The final piece of the plan falls into place. Guy Fawkes will light the fuse. The conspirators will be miles away. The explosion will happen. The government will be destroyed, and in the chaos, they'll install a Catholic monarch. James's daughter, Princess Elizabeth, 9 years old, kidnapped from her residence in the Midlands. A puppet queen, controlled by Catholics, restoring the faith. It's all planned, all ready, all set. And then, 10 days before the attack, everything falls apart. October 26th, 1605, 10 days before the planned attack. A Catholic member of Parliament named Lord Monteagle is at his house in Hoxton when a servant arrives with a letter. Anonymous, no signature, no return address, hand-delivered by a stranger who disappeared immediately. Monteagle opens it and reads something that makes his blood run cold. The letter is cryptic, vague, but the meaning is clear. Something terrible is going to happen at Parliament soon, and he should stay away. My lord, out of the love I bear to some of your friends, I have a care of your preservation. Therefore, I would advise you, as you tender your life, to devise some excuse to shift of your attendance at this Parliament. For God and man hath concurred to punish the wickedness of this time. And think not slightly of this advertisement, but retire yourself into your country, where you may expect the event in safety. For though there be no appearance of any stir, yet I say they shall receive a terrible blow this Parliament, and yet they shall not see who hurts them. Monteagle reads it twice, 3 times, and immediately takes it to Robert Cecil, the King's Secretary of State, the head of the intelligence network, the man responsible for protecting the government from threats like this. Cecil reads the letter and understands immediately someone is planning an attack on Parliament, something big enough that they're warning sympathetic Catholics to stay away. This isn't a bluff. This isn't a prank. This is real. But Cecil is careful, methodical. He doesn't panic, doesn't order immediate searches. Instead, he watches, waits, because he wants to catch the conspirators in the act, wants undeniable evidence, wants maximum political impact. He shows the letter to King James. James is paranoid about Catholic plots, has been since his mother's execution. He reads the letter and fixates on one phrase. They shall receive a terrible blow, this Parliament, and yet they shall not see who hurts them. A blow you can't see. What could that mean? James thinks. And then it hits him. Gunpowder, an explosion, underground. You wouldn't see it until it was too late. James orders a search, but not immediately. He wants to wait, to see if the conspirators do anything suspicious, to give them enough rope to hang themselves, figuratively and literally. And here's where the conspiracy theories start. Because some historians believe Cecil already knew about the plot, that he'd known for weeks, maybe months, that he'd been watching the conspirators, letting them rent the cellar, letting them move the gunpowder, letting the plot develop fully so he could arrest them at the last possible moment for maximum drama, maximum terror, maximum justification for cracking down on Catholics even harder. There's no proof of this, but it's not impossible. Cecil was a spy master, ruthless, calculating. He had informants everywhere. The idea that a major conspiracy could develop without him knowing is hard to believe. So maybe he did know. Maybe he let it happen. Maybe the Monteagle letter was theater, a way to justify a search that was already planned. We'll never know for sure, but what we do know is this. The letter reached Cecil on October 26th, and for the next 9 days, nothing happened. No searches, no arrests, just surveillance, watching, waiting. And the conspirators? Some of them heard about the letter. Francis Tresham, one of the conspirators, was Monteagle's brother-in-law. Some historians think he wrote the letter, trying to save his relative while still keeping the plot alive. Others think it was someone else, someone outside the group who knew enough to warn, but not enough to expose. Whoever wrote it, the result was the same: panic. The conspirators met, debated. Should they abort? Should they run? Should they accelerate the plan? Robert Catesby refused to quit, said the letter was vague, could mean anything. Maybe it was a bluff, maybe it was a test. They'd come too far, sacrificed too much. They had to see it through. Most of the conspirators agreed or were too afraid to disagree with Catesby. But some fled, left London, went into hiding, waiting to see what would happen. Guy Fawkes stayed. He'd been living in that cellar for months, guarding the gunpowder. He wasn't going to abandon it now, not when they were so close. So he stayed, waiting, watching, ready to light the fuse. And on November 4th, just after midnight, the search finally came. November 4th, 1605, just after midnight. The Lord Chamberlain, the Earl of Suffolk, arrives at Westminster with a group of guards. They're searching the buildings around Parliament, looking for anything suspicious, following up on the Monteagle letter. They start with the cellars, random checks, storage spaces. Nothing seems unusual. Firewood, coal, normal supplies. And then they reach the cellar beneath the House of Lords, the one rented by Thomas Percy. They go inside and find a man, tall, dark, bearded, dressed plainly. He identifies himself as John Johnson, says he's Percy's servant, says he's guarding the supplies, the firewood and coal that Percy stores here for winter. The guards look around, see the barrels, covered with fuel. They ask Johnson what's in them. He says coal, firewood, heating supplies. Nothing unusual. The Earl of Suffolk is suspicious. Johnson seems nervous, too alert for someone who's supposed to be a simple servant. And there's something about the way he's standing, guarding, protective, like he's hiding something, but they don't search thoroughly, not yet. The Earl orders the guards to keep an eye on the cellar, on Johnson, and they leave, report back to Cecil. Something feels wrong, they're not sure what, but something. Cecil decides, time to move. He orders a second search, more thorough, more aggressive, and this time they bring soldiers, armed, ready for trouble. Around midnight again, the night of November 4th into November 5th, just hours before Parliament is set to open, the soldiers return to the cellar, push past Guy Fawkes, and start moving the firewood and coal. And there they are, 36 barrels, not coal, not firewood, gunpowder, enough to blow Parliament sky high, and Guy Fawkes standing there, caught, trapped, caught literally red-handed, except for one detail, one crucial detail that historians still argue about. Guy Fawkes had matches, touch paper, a slow-burning fuse, all in his pockets, ready to use. He could have lit it, right there, blown himself and the soldiers to pieces, maybe destroyed part of the building, maybe killed King James anyway if he'd already arrived. But he didn't. He surrendered, gave his name as John Johnson, refused to say anything else, and was arrested, taken to the Tower of London, and the conspiracy was over, or so they thought. November 5th, 1605, morning. King James was supposed to be at Parliament, the state opening, but news of the plot reached him. He stayed away, safe, alive, and absolutely furious. Meanwhile, the other conspirators were scattered, some still in London, some fled: Robert Catesby, Thomas Winter, John Wright, Christopher Wright, Thomas Percy. They heard about Guy's arrest, knew the plot had failed, knew they were being hunted. They had a backup plan, sort of. If the explosion failed, they would start an uprising in the Midlands, Catholic country, recruit Catholics to rebel, kidnap Princess Elizabeth, use her as a rallying point, force a Catholic restoration by civil war. It was desperate, improvised, but it was all they had left. So they rode hard north toward the Midlands, stopping at Catholic estates, trying to recruit, trying to raise an army, and nobody joined them, not a single person. English Catholics were horrified, not inspired. They didn't want rebellion. They wanted to survive. They'd heard about the Gunpowder plot, about Guy Fawkes arrested, about 36 barrels of gunpowder, and they wanted nothing to do with it. The conspirators were shocked, betrayed. They'd risked everything, planned for over a year, all to save English Catholics. And now Catholics were turning their backs, refusing to fight. Some were even turning them in to authorities. By November 7th, the conspirators were desperate, running out of money, running out of options. They holed up at Holbesh House, Staffordshire, a Catholic manor, armed, surrounded, waiting for the end. They tried to dry out some gunpowder that had gotten wet, spread it near the fire, and it ignited, exploded. John Grant was badly burned, blinded. It was like God himself was punishing them. On November 8th, the sheriff of Worcester arrived with soldiers. 200 men surrounded the house, called for surrender. The conspirators refused. There was a brief firefight, shots exchanged, and then it was over. Robert Catesby was shot, killed instantly. Thomas Percy was shot, died next to Catesby, their blood mingling on the ground. The Wright brothers fought, were killed. The others surrendered, wounded, defeated, knowing what was coming. They were taken to London, to the Tower, where Guy Fawkes was already being held, already being tortured, already breaking. Guy Fawkes was arrested on November 5th, taken to the Tower of London, and at first he refused to talk, gave his name as John Johnson, said nothing else, no names, no details, no confession. The interrogators tried everything, questions, threats. But Guy stayed silent. He was a soldier, trained, experienced. He knew how to resist, and for 2 days he gave them nothing. Then King James personally authorized torture. In writing, the warrant still exists. The gentler tortures are to be first used unto him, and so by degrees proceeding to the worst. The gentler tortures. Think about that phrase, what James considered gentle torture. They started with manacles. Guy's wrists were chained above his head, his body weight pulling on the joints, shoulders straining, arms stretched for hours, then days. The pain is constant, searing, joints dislocating, muscles tearing, but Guy held out. So they moved to the rack, the most feared torture device in the tower, a wooden frame, ankles tied at one end, wrists at the other, and slowly, the frame is turned, stretching the body, pulling arms and legs apart, joints separating, bones cracking, ligaments snapping. The pain is indescribable. People who survived the rack said it felt like being torn apart, like their body was being pulled into pieces. And the worst part? The torturer controlled the speed, could stretch you slowly, millimeter by millimeter, making it last, making you feel every moment of your body breaking. Guy Fawkes held out for 2 days, 2 days on the rack, and then he broke. Started talking, gave them names: Robert Catesby, Thomas Wintour, John Wright, Thomas Percy, all of them. He told them about the cellar, the gunpowder, the plan to kill the king, everything. We know how badly the torture damaged him because his signatures survive. Before the torture, Guy's signature was strong, clear, controlled. After the torture, it's barely recognizable. A shaking scrawl. He could barely hold a pen. His hands were destroyed, his body broken. But by the time Guy confessed, it didn't matter. The other conspirators were already captured, already in the tower, all of them being tortured, all of them giving the same story, confirming what Guy had said. The trial was scheduled. January 27, 1606, Westminster Hall, and everyone knew it would be a show trial. The verdict was already decided, the sentences already determined. This wasn't about justice. This was about sending a message. January 27, 1606, Westminster Hall. The surviving conspirators are brought in: Guy Fawkes, Thomas Winter, Ambrose Rookwood, Robert Keyes, Thomas Bates, John Grant, Everard Digby. Robert Catesby is dead, shot at Holbesh House. Thomas Percy is dead. The Wright brothers are dead, but these 7 survived, and now they face trial. The hall is packed. Nobles, commoners. Everyone wants to see the men who tried to kill the king, who tried to blow up Parliament. The atmosphere is electric. Hatred, fear, curiosity, all mixed together. The charges are read: high treason, conspiracy to murder the king, attempting to destroy Parliament. The evidence is overwhelming. Confessions from all the conspirators. The barrels of gunpowder, the rented cellar, everything. The defense is minimal, almost non-existent. Some of the conspirators plead not guilty, but it's futile. The verdict is predetermined. They're going through the motions. Guy Fawkes pleads guilty, admits everything, says he regrets only that the plot failed, that if he could do it again, he would, that killing the king was God's will, that he has no remorse. It's a death wish. He knows it. Everyone knows it. But Guy Fawkes isn't begging for mercy. He's defiant, unrepentant, even broken and tortured. Even knowing what's coming, he won't recant. The trial lasts 1 day for 7 men's lives. The verdict is unanimous, guilty, all of them. And the sentence is the worst punishment in English law, hanged, drawn, and quartered. The crowd erupts, cheering, shouting. This is what they wanted: justice, vengeance, blood. The executions are scheduled. January 30th for Everard Digby, Robert Winter, John Grant, and Thomas Bates. January 31st for Thomas Winter, Ambrose Rookwood, Robert Keyes, and Guy Fawkes. 4 days to live, 4 days to pray, to confess, to make peace with God, because what's coming is designed to be the most horrific death imaginable. Let me describe what hanged, drawn, and quartered actually means, because it's important to understand the brutality, the deliberate, calculated cruelty of this execution method. This isn't quick. This isn't merciful. This is designed to be as painful and humiliating as possible. First, the condemned is dragged through the streets on a wooden hurdle, a sled, behind a horse, through mud and filth, crowds throwing garbage, spitting, cursing. It's meant to humiliate, to break their spirit before the real punishment begins. Then they're brought to the scaffold in front of a massive crowd, thousands of people. This is public entertainment. Families bring children. Vendors sell food and drink. It's a carnival atmosphere, a festival of death. The condemned is hanged, but not dropped, not a broken neck, not a quick death. They're lifted slowly, by rope around the neck, choking, strangling, but not enough to kill quickly, just enough to make them unconscious. They're left hanging until they're almost dead, until their face turns purple, until their body goes limp. Then they're cut down, while still alive, still conscious, laid on a table, and the real horror begins. The executioner cuts them open, slices the abdomen, pulls out the intestines, slowly, while they're still alive, still watching, and burns them right there, in front of their eyes. They can smell their own flesh burning, feel their body being emptied. Then the executioner cuts off the genitals. More humiliation, more pain, unmanning them in front of the crowd, and then finally, mercifully, they cut out the heart. Death comes, finally, after minutes of unimaginable agony. But it's not over. The body is beheaded and then cut into 4 quarters. The head and quarters are displayed on spikes, on bridges, on city gates, left to rot, to be eaten by crows. A warning to anyone who might consider treason. This is what awaited Guy Fawkes and his co-conspirators. This is what they knew was coming. For 4 days, they waited, prayed, confessed. Some broke down. Some maintained dignity. January 30th, 1606. The first 4 are executed: Everard Digby, Robert Winter, John Grant, Thomas Bates, in St. Paul's churchyard in front of thousands. The descriptions from witnesses are horrific. Digby was the first, young, handsome, wealthy. He maintained his composure until the very end, said a final prayer, was hanged, cut down. And then the butchery began. Witnesses said he was still conscious when they pulled out his intestines, that he watched as they burned his organs, that he died slowly, painfully, taking minutes to finally expire. The others followed, one by one, the crowd roaring approval with each death. This was justice. This was what happened to traitors. This was the price of trying to kill the king. January 31st, 1606. The next day, Old Palace Yard, Westminster, right next to Parliament. The building the conspirators had tried to destroy, symbolic, deliberate. The government wanted everyone to see what happened to those who challenged royal authority. Thomas Winter, Ambrose Rookwood, Robert Keyes, and finally, Guy Fawkes. They were held in the tower overnight, listening to the preparations, hearing the scaffold being built, the crowd gathering, knowing exactly what was coming. They were brought out one by one. Winter went first, then Rookwood, then Keyes, each execution taking 15 to 20 minutes, each one more horrific than the last. The executioner was experienced, skilled. He knew how to keep them alive as long as possible, to maximize the suffering. And Guy Fawkes watched his friends die, watched them scream, beginning, suffer. He was last, the grand finale, the star attraction, the man whose name would be remembered forever. They dragged him to the scaffold. The crowd was massive, thousands, maybe tens of thousands, all there to see Guy Fawkes die, all there to watch the man who tried to blow up Parliament get what he deserved. The noose was placed around his neck, and in that moment, Guy Fawkes did something remarkable, something that ensured his legend would live forever. He didn't wait, didn't let them control his death. He jumped, threw himself off the scaffold with all his strength. The rope snapped tight, his neck broke. Instantly, he died in seconds, before they could cut him down, before they could torture him, before they could make him suffer. Even in death, Guy Fawkes had one last act of defiance. He denied them the satisfaction, cheated the executioner, died on his own terms. The crowd wasn't sure how to react. Was it cowardice or courage, running from justice, or refusing to give them the spectacle they wanted? Historians still debate it. But dead is dead. The executioner still did his job, cut down the body, disemboweled it, cut off the genitals, removed the heart, beheaded it, quartered it. Even though Guy was already gone, even though he couldn't feel it, the punishment had to be completed. The message had to be sent. Guy Fawkes's head was placed on a spike, displayed on London Bridge, where it stayed for years, rotting, decaying, a warning to anyone who might consider treason, a reminder that the crown always wins. And that should have been the end of the story. Guy Fawkes, dead, executed, his conspiracy crushed, his cause lost, his name destined to be forgotten. Except that's not what happened, because Guy Fawkes didn't just die that day, he was born as something else, as a legend, as a symbol, as the man who nearly changed history. The Gunpowder plot failed. The conspirators were dead. King James survived. Parliament survived. The government remained intact. And you'd think that would be the end of it, that life would return to normal, that the plot would be just another footnote in history. But you'd be wrong, because the Gunpowder plot changed England forever, in ways nobody expected, in ways that still affect us today. First, the persecution of Catholics got worse, much worse. King James and Parliament were terrified, convinced that every Catholic was a potential terrorist, that every priest was a conspirator, that Catholic families were breeding grounds for traitors. New laws were passed, harsh laws. Catholics couldn't vote, couldn't hold public office, couldn't practice law, couldn't serve in the military, couldn't teach, couldn't own land in certain areas. The restrictions were comprehensive, systematic, designed to make it impossible for Catholics to participate in English society. And these laws lasted, not for years, not for decades, for centuries. The Catholic Relief Act, which finally removed most of these restrictions, wasn't passed until 1829. Over 200 years, generations of English Catholics lived as second-class citizens. all because of what 13 men tried to do in 1605. Second, November 5th became a national holiday. Parliament passed the observance of 5th November Act, making it mandatory to celebrate the failure of the Gunpowder plot. Church services, bonfires, bell ringing, all to remember the day God saved Protestant England from Catholic terrorists. And it wasn't just a celebration, it was propaganda, anti-Catholic propaganda. For centuries, November 5th was a day to burn effigies of the Pope, to attack Catholic homes, to remind everyone that Catholics were the enemy, that they couldn't be trusted, that they were inherently treasonous. Children were taught rhymes, songs, all demonizing Catholics, all celebrating Guy Fawkes' failure. Remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. It was programming, generational hatred, passed down from parents to children. Third, security around Parliament changed forever. The government became obsessed with preventing another attempt. New laws were passed, new protocols established, and to this day, before every state opening of Parliament, the yeomen of the guard search the cellars. It's ceremonial now. Tourists think it's quaint, but it started as genuine terror. Fear that Catholic assassins might try again. Fear that Guy Fawkes had inspired others. The Gunpowder plot broke something in the English psyche. Trust, community, the idea that your neighbors were who they said they were. Everyone became suspect. Everyone was potentially a conspirator. It was paranoia on a national scale, and it lasted for generations. But something strange happened over the centuries. The meaning of Guy Fawkes' night changed, evolved, transformed into something the original celebrants wouldn't recognize. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the anti-Catholic fervor was fading. Not completely, but gradually. November 5th was still celebrated. Bonfires, fireworks. But the religious hatred was becoming less intense, more of a tradition than a crusade. And the Guy Fawkes effigy? It started to change. Sometimes it was the Pope, sometimes it was Guy. Sometimes it was just a stuffed figure. Kids would make them, parade them through the streets, asking for a penny for the guy, begging money to buy fireworks. The religious significance was fading, becoming just a fun tradition. By the 20th century, most people had forgotten why they celebrated November 5th. They knew it had something to do with Guy Fawkes, something about Parliament, but the details were fuzzy. The hatred was gone. It was just an excuse for fireworks and bonfires and fun. And then, in the 1980s and 90s, something remarkable happened. Guy Fawkes became cool. He became a symbol of rebellion, of resistance, of fighting against tyranny. How? Why? Because people started asking questions. Who was Guy Fawkes really? What did he actually do? And was he maybe, just maybe, the good guy? Think about it from a different perspective. Guy Fawkes was fighting religious oppression. Catholics were being persecuted, fined, imprisoned, executed, their children taken, their properties seized. They had no legal recourse, no way to change things peacefully. The government was crushing them, and Guy Fawkes said no. He fought back. He resisted. He was willing to die rather than accept tyranny. From that perspective, he's not a terrorist. He's a freedom fighter, a revolutionary, someone who stood up to an oppressive government. Now, obviously, trying to blow up Parliament and kill hundreds of people is not heroic. It's terrorism, mass murder. There's no way to justify it. But the idea behind it? resistance to oppression, that resonates, especially with people who feel powerless, who feel like the system is rigged against them, who feel like violence is the only language power understands. And that's how Guy Fawkes became a counterculture icon. The punk rockers embraced him. The anarchists, the anti-establishment activists, they wore Guy Fawkes masks, used his image, quoted the rhyme, not because they wanted to blow up Parliament, but because they wanted to challenge authority, question power, resist. Then came V for Vendetta, the graphic novel, the movie, and Guy Fawkes exploded into mainstream consciousness as a symbol of rebellion, the mask, the philosophy. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. The anonymous movement adopted the mask, wore it at protests, at demonstrations, made it a symbol of digital resistance, of fighting corporate and government power, of standing up for privacy and freedom. The irony is perfect. The man executed as the ultimate traitor, the terrorist whose face was burned in effigy for centuries, became an icon of freedom, of resistance, of challenging tyranny. The government tried to make him a warning. Instead, they made him a martyr. But let's talk about something the fireworks and celebrations always forget. The families, the wives, the children, the people who loved the conspirators, who had nothing to do with the plot, who suffered anyway. Robert Catesby's son, 8 years old when his father died, his mother already dead. The family property confiscated, the family name destroyed. He grew up with nothing, the son of a traitor, shunned, hated, blamed for his father's crimes. Guy Fawkes had no children, but he had family. They changed their names, moved away, tried to escape the stigma, but it followed them. For generations, the Fawkes name was synonymous with treason, with terrorism, with evil. The other conspirators' families faced similar fates. Property seized, names ruined, children growing up knowing their fathers tried to kill the king, tried to destroy the government, and failed, and died horribly. Some of the families converted to Protestantism, publicly, desperately, trying to prove their loyalty, trying to escape persecution, trying to survive, but it didn't always work. The taint remained, the suspicion, the fear. And it wasn't just the immediate families. Anyone connected to the conspirators was suspect. Friends, associates, business partners, Catholic priests who had given them communion, all investigated, some arrested, some tortured. The dragnet was wide. Father Henry Garnet, the Jesuit priest who had heard Robert Catesby's confession, who knew about the plot through the seal of confession but couldn't reveal it. He was arrested, tried, executed, hanged, drawn, and quartered. Even though he hadn't participated, even though he had learned about it under the seal of confession, even though he had actually tried to discourage it, he died anyway. That's what the Gunpowder plot cost. Not just 13 men, but dozens, maybe hundreds, of families destroyed, lives ruined, all because Robert Catesby convinced 12 other men that mass murder was God's will. Here's the question historians love to debate. What if Guy Fawkes had lit that fuse? What if the explosion had happened? What if King James and Parliament had been destroyed? What then? Let's think it through. November 5th, 1605. Parliament is in session. Everyone's there. King James, the Lords, the Commons, bishops, judges, basically the entire government of England. And then, at the appointed time, Guy Fawkes lights the fuse and runs. Or maybe he stays. Maybe he's willing to die in the blast. The fuse burns, reaches the gunpowder, 2,000 pounds of explosives and detonates. Modern analysis suggests the blast would have been catastrophic. The entire House of Lords destroyed. Stone and timber reduced to rubble. Everyone inside killed instantly. The explosion would have been heard for miles. Windows shattered across London, buildings damaged blocks away, possibly hundreds dead, maybe over 1,000. It would have been the deadliest single event in British history up to that point. King James, dead. His heir, Prince Henry, 9 years old, probably dead too if he was in attendance. The entire line of succession, gone. Every member of Parliament, dead. The judiciary, dead. The Church of England leadership, dead. In seconds, the English government would have been decapitated. Completely, utterly. And then, chaos. Complete chaos. Scotland, where James was also king, would have reacted. Probably invaded England, claimed authority. There would have been succession crisis, civil war, different factions backing different claimants to the throne. The conspirators planned to kidnap Princess Elizabeth, James's daughter, 9 years old, install her as a Catholic puppet queen, but that's fantasy. Nobody would have accepted that. Not the Protestants, not Scotland, not Parliament, if any members had survived. A 9-year-old Catholic queen installed by terrorists? It would have triggered civil war immediately. Spain might have invaded, or France, or both. Seeing England in chaos, seeing an opportunity, the Catholic powers of Europe smelling blood, coming to help restore Catholic rule, meaning occupation, conquest, partition. England might have ceased to exist as an independent country, broken up, divided, conquered, all because of one explosion, or maybe something else. Maybe in the chaos, Catholics would have risen up. Maybe the explosion would have sparked a revolution. Maybe England would have become Catholic again. Maybe Princess Elizabeth really would have become queen. Maybe the conspirators' plan would have worked. We'll never know. But historians generally agree. Even if the explosion had succeeded, the conspirators would have failed. Because destroying the government doesn't create a new one. It just creates a vacuum. And vacuums get filled by whoever has the most power, the most guns, the most money, the most foreign support. And the conspirators had none of that. They had idealism, faith, conviction, but not power, not enough to seize control of a country, not enough to hold it, not enough to create the Catholic England they dreamed of. So even if Guy Fawkes had lit that fuse, even if the explosion had happened, even if King James had died, the Gunpowder plot probably would have failed anyway, just in a different way, a bloodier way, a way that destroyed England in the process. Maybe Guy Fawkes dying in the Tower was the better outcome for everyone, even for Catholics, because if the plot had succeeded, the backlash would have been even worse. Catholic genocide, complete eradication, not just legal persecution, actual slaughter. So maybe the plot failing saved more lives than it cost. Maybe Guy Fawkes died so that English Catholics could live in subjugation, in second-class status, but alive. It's a grim calculus, but that's history. There are no good options, only less bad ones. Let's talk about something often ignored, the Catholic perspective. Because for centuries, Guy Fawkes has been portrayed as a villain, a terrorist, a traitor. And from a Protestant English perspective, he was. But what about Catholics? How do they view Guy Fawkes? And the answer is complicated. Because Catholics were the victims of the Gunpowder plot as much as anyone. After the plot failed, Catholic persecution intensified. For generations, the plot confirmed Protestant fears. proved that Catholics couldn't be trusted, that they were all potential terrorists, waiting for their chance to strike. Every Catholic in England paid the price for what 13 men tried to do. So from one Catholic perspective, Guy Fawkes is a disaster, a cautionary tale, proof that violence doesn't work, that terrorism backfires, that radical action causes more harm than good. English Catholics spent centuries saying, "We're not like them. We're loyal. We condemn the Gunpowder plot," desperately trying to distance themselves from Guy Fawkes and his co-conspirators. But there's another perspective, a minority view, but it exists. Some Catholics see Guy Fawkes as a martyr, someone who fought back against oppression, who was willing to die for his faith, who stood up to tyranny when everyone else submitted. They don't condone the violence, don't celebrate the attempt to murder hundreds of people, but they understand the desperation, the hopelessness, the feeling that peaceful resistance had failed and violence was the only option left. It's the same debate that happens with any resistance movement. Freedom fighters versus terrorists, heroes versus villains. It depends on perspective, on who's telling the story, on which side of the conflict you're on. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Guy Fawkes was both. He was a terrorist, planning mass murder, targeting civilians, using violence to achieve political goals. That's terrorism by definition. But he was also resisting genuine oppression, fighting against a government that was persecuting his community, denying them basic rights, executing their priests, destroying their families. Both things can be true. He can be a terrorist and a resistance fighter, a villain and a victim, a murderer and a martyr. History isn't simple. People aren't simple. Guy Fawkes wasn't simple. And maybe that's why his story endures. Because it's complicated. Because it makes us uncomfortable. Because it forces us to ask difficult questions about resistance and oppression and violence and justice. Questions that don't have easy answers. Let me tell you about something most people don't think about: the security legacy of the Gunpowder plot. Because Guy Fawkes changed how governments think about security forever, not just in England, everywhere. Before 1605, security was about defending against external threats, armies, invasions, foreign powers. The idea that the threat could be internal, that ordinary citizens could be terrorists, that was new, revolutionary, terrifying. The Gunpowder plot taught governments that threats could come from within, from people who looked normal, spoke the language, lived among the population, who could spend months or years planning in secret, who could infiltrate, sabotage, strike when least expected, and governments responded by developing internal security apparatus, spy networks, informants, surveillance. Before the Gunpowder plot, England had intelligence services, but they focused on foreign threats. After the plot, the focus shifted to internal dissent, to religious minorities, to anyone who might be a threat. Sound familiar? Because this is the birth of modern security state thinking, the idea that the government needs to monitor its own citizens, to watch for threats from within, to sacrifice some liberty for security. It started with the Gunpowder plot. The observance of 5th November Act wasn't just about celebrating, it was about compliance, about forcing everyone to publicly affirm their loyalty. If you didn't celebrate, if you didn't attend the mandatory church service, you were suspect, potentially a traitor, potentially the next Guy Fawkes. It's the same logic that drives modern security theater. The searches at airports, the surveillance cameras, the data collection, the monitoring of communications, all justified by the need to prevent the next terrorist attack, the next Guy Fawkes. And here's the really uncomfortable part. It works. Sort of. There hasn't been another gunpowder plot. There hasn't been a successful attack on the state opening of Parliament. The security measures, the surveillance, the paranoia, they've prevented attacks. But at what cost? How much freedom? How much privacy? How much trust? Guy Fawkes forced us to ask, how far should governments go to protect citizens? How much security is enough? How much is too much? And we're still asking those questions, still debating, still trying to find the balance 400 years later. So what does Guy Fawkes mean today, in 2024? When most people don't even know the real story? When November 5th is just an excuse for fireworks? When the Guy Fawkes mask is worn by protesters who've never read about the actual man? The meaning has fractured, splintered, become whatever people need it to be. To some, Guy Fawkes is still a villain, a terrorist, a warning about religious extremism, about the dangers of fanaticism, about what happens when people convince themselves that violence is justified. To others, he's a symbol of resistance, of fighting power, of refusing to submit. The anonymous mask, the protests, the movements, they're not endorsing terrorism. They're endorsing the idea that ordinary people can challenge authority, can say no, can resist. To historians, he's complicated, neither hero nor villain, a product of his time, a desperate man in desperate circumstances who made terrible choices, understandable choices maybe, given the oppression he faced, but still terrible, still wrong. To the British public, he's mostly tradition. Bonfire night, fireworks, fun, something to do with kids on a cold November evening. The actual story? The actual man? Most don't know. Don't care, it's just a thing we do. Like Christmas or Halloween, a cultural ritual divorced from its origins. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's fine that Guy Fawkes has become whatever people need him to be. A warning, a symbol, a tradition, a myth. Because myths are powerful precisely because they're flexible. Because they can mean different things to different people. Because they evolve. The real Guy Fawkes died in 1606, broken, tortured, executed, his cause lost, his conspiracy crushed. But the mythical Guy Fawkes, he's immortal. He's whatever we make him, and he'll live forever, in masks, in protests, in bonfires, in rhymes, in the collective memory of a culture that can't quite decide what it thinks of him. Remember the 5th of November. But remember what exactly? The plot? The man? The executions? The persecution? The resistance? The tyranny? All of it? None of it? Just the fireworks? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the point of remembering isn't to get the history exactly right. Maybe it's just to mark the date, to acknowledge that something significant happened, even if we're not quite sure what, even if the meaning has changed, even if Guy Fawkes would be horrified by what his name has become. November 5th, 2024. Across Britain, bonfires are lit, fireworks explode, children parade Guy Fawkes effigies through the streets. Families gather to watch the displays, to drink hot chocolate, to enjoy the spectacle. None of them are thinking about torture, about executions, about religious persecution, about 13 desperate men planning mass murder. They're just enjoying the show, and that's fine. That's how traditions work. They outlive their origins, become something new, something different. But somewhere in the back of the collective consciousness, Guy Fawkes lingers, not as history, as something else, as a question mark, as a challenge, as a reminder that ordinary people can change things, for better or worse. That one person with enough conviction can shake empires, can terrify kings, can become immortal. Guy Fawkes didn't save English Catholics, didn't restore the faith, didn't kill the king, didn't destroy Parliament. He failed completely, utterly, and then died horribly, his cause lost, his name vilified for centuries. But he won in one way, the only way that really matters. He's remembered. 419 years later, we're still talking about him, still saying his name, still lighting fires in his memory, even if we've forgotten why. He wanted to change England forever, and he did, just not in the way he intended, not through violence, not through terror, but through memory, through myth, through the strange alchemy that turns men into legends and history into tradition. So tonight, when you watch the fireworks, when you stand near the bonfire, when you hear the old rhyme, remember not just the plot, not just the man, but what the story teaches us about desperation, about violence, about unintended consequences, about how revolutions rarely go as planned, about how the world is complicated and people are complicated and history is complicated. Remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Not because Guy Fawkes was a hero. He wasn't. Not because his cause was just. It wasn't. Not because violence works. It doesn't. But because forgetting is dangerous. Because history, even uncomfortable history, teaches us things about ourselves, about power, about resistance, about what happens when governments oppress and citizens rebel, about the cycles of violence and vengeance that echo through centuries. Guy Fawkes is dead, has been for over 400 years, but his story lives in the flames, in the explosions, in the darkness of a November night, a reminder that the past never really dies. It just changes shape, becomes something else, something we're still trying to understand. Happy Bonfire Night. Remember the story, all of it, the good parts and the bad parts and the parts that make us uncomfortable, because that's what history is. Not a simple morality tale, not heroes and villains, but complicated people making complicated choices in impossible situations. And sometimes, centuries later, we light fires to remember them. Even if we're not quite sure what we're remembering anymore, the fire still burns, the memory endures. And Guy Fawkes, wherever he is, probably wouldn't know whether to laugh or cry.